Greetings, welcome. I am Richard Hermes. I'm a lecturer here in the SMU English Department and director of the Hughes Fellowships in Creative Writing. It is my real pleasure to introduce our two readers to you tonight, L.A. Johnson and J.D. Debris. Our first reader tonight is L.A. Johnson. I'll be calling her Liz. She goes by Liz also, but in her poetic persona, she's L.A. She's the author of the poetry collection Lost Music, which is forthcoming from Milkweed Editions in 2027. And as I said, she's an associate editor of Swirl and Vortex, the collected poems of Larry Levis. This is a book that's really been capturing the attention and receiving a lot of love from critics and practicing poets this year. She holds an MFA in poetry from Columbia University and a PhD in literature, creative writing from University of Southern California, where she was a Mellon Humanities and University of the Future postdoctoral fellow. She's a winner of the 2022 Mississippi Review Poetry Prize, the Greensboro Review Poetry Prize, and the 2021 Arts and Letters Rumi Poetry Prize. Her poems appear in the Atlantic, American Poetry Review, Poetry Magazine, and elsewhere. She's received support from her writing from the Vermont Studio Center and from the Walt Whitman Birthplace Association, who awarded her the 2026 Gwen A. Nussbaum Prize for Poets 35 and Under. I told you she was cooler than us. As I mentioned, she also co-curates the poetry reading series First Rodeo, and she's on the board of SMU's Project Poetica. Just a few words about her work. The poems in her chapbook, Little Climates, are poems of intimacy under pressure. They are poems that are alert to how love creates what we might call these weather systems, little weather systems of its own, what one blurb beautifully calls the microclimates in affection. And they reveal how the interior life can feel both lush and wintry, both baroque and elemental at the same time. One of the things I admire about these poems is how they can pivot. They are both emotionally close up, but also keenly aware of the larger world and how the landscapes we live in, the landscapes we make with each other, are changing. Liz's forthcoming collection, Lost Music, reckons with the sudden death of the speaker's father and the reverberations of grief that flow from that event. As Liz describes, these poems consider the limits of the elegy as the speaker attempts to come to terms with death. To make sense of the idea that, quote, existence could be willed away at a whim by rain or high wind. Those are lines to close her poem, Night Passage. Her new book in progress, the project she's working on these days here at SMU, looks at her family's history and the history of California, which is her home state. Please give a warm welcome to L.A. Johnson.
Thank you so much for that introduction. That was lovely. And I just want to start by saying thank you all here for coming, and thank you more specifically to this beautiful literary community and English department at SMU. I really did not know what to expect when I got here. I had been living in California for a long time. It was actually my first time in Texas when I came here, and what I have found was just truly a department full of extraordinarily kind people. I mean, Chris, David, so many here have just really made this place feel very quickly like a home. And what I also see here is many people from the local literary community, and I have just really enjoyed being here in Dallas. So I'm going to read a few different things. Richard kindly mentioned the book. I have spent years of my life editing, Swirl and Vortex by Larry Levis. I began working on this project in 2022. For those of you who are not familiar with his work, he published 5 books in his lifetime, and he passed away suddenly by heart attack in 1996. When he died, he did not have an immediate next of kin, and so there was a lot of mishandling of his drafts and materials. And so largely, my work has been archival, going through his materials to make sure that we had the final word on the poems we already knew about. But in this process, we actually discovered new poems of his that had not been seen before. And so I just wanted to open by reading one of these poems, and it ties into my own work. So this is one of the poems I discovered in the archive that he was working on in the months before he died. The Orchard. I had already decided that a thing could not be seen for the thing it was when I looked up and waved my father over. Beside our orchard of late Alberta peaches, a picker had hanged himself. The man was still swaying a little by his necktie. There was the sound of the tree limb creaking from the weight it held, and the bees clustering like a moving gold over the plain white box of their hive. And what I noticed then wasn't the man, but the quiet tie with its twisting pattern of polka dots, dark brown on a field of white, and how the tie itself had not been long enough, and so was knotted in a half hitch to a piece of rope he'd looped over the tree limb before sliding the silk of the tie against his neck until it was taut. The rope, I remember, had the complexion of dust after a rain, and the shadows underneath the trees kept changing without my actually seeing them change. From one moment to another, I couldn't see them change even if I had watched for that, and only for that. The act the man had undertaken was ancient. The rope ascended to a future without him in it, and I suppose the necktie was the quiet he wore in going back and forth between the two, the past and the future. It was an old orchard of late Alberta peaches that held a wild taste that is by now entirely lost, a flavor that once untethered everything from what it was. The humming of bees, the dust spiraling in shafts of light, the calluses we studied at school, the faint twang in our English like wind in fence wire, like fate. I could feel it all come back and turn into light for a moment when I bit into one, years later, the taste of its flesh turning everything except the man who had swayed in front of me there into a light so weightless and so quickly ascending that for a moment, but only for a moment, I knew what it meant, knew what the body meant by swaying there, no matter what the man who tried to make an example of it meant. I knew what the body meant as my eyes lifted above it. It meant what was soaring above us into the limbs of the tree and beyond. As I like to say to my students sometimes when we read a poem like this, pull over if you're driving. What I wanted to point out about this poem, one of the things about working on this project was seeing these drafts and enacting the final handwriting on many of these printed drafts. And in particular, what was notable about this one was one of the things he added at the very end was this very small part at the very opening of the poem, when I looked up and waved my father over. When this poem had been worked through many drafts, his father was not in the poem. It was just an encounter with him and the man who had hung himself alone. And what I think is notable about this change, one of the things that I learned through this process is the idea of writing as truly a living thing, revision as part of the act of poetry. And in the case of Levis and in the case of my own work, revision as an act of re-seeing. And the idea that he felt this poem wasn't complete, aside from needing to have his father enter to experience this this tragedy and this grief together, is something that I think is really notable, and an insight that I had from how elegy can revise our own narrative and our own experiences to make something perhaps different than what was. And so, so that being said, I just wanted to share that a little bit about that editorial work. And now I'll talk about my book. Lost Music is forthcoming in what feels like forever away from now. As Richard mentioned, it deals with the loss of my own father. He died in 2019 suddenly. It was an interesting thing to happen to me from a perspective of writing, because I had written, quite rigorously for many years before. I'd done an MFA. I was in the middle of doing my PhD when he died. And when he died, I completely stopped writing. I didn't write for more than a year. And when I eventually returned to the page, it was the pandemic, which was also a very strange time to start writing again. One of the things a lot of the poems ended up grappling with was this idea of language and speaking, and not only the lack of creative speaking I had been doing for that time, but trying to process that when these things, happened in my life, I could no longer speak to my father. So I'll read the title poem. Lost Music. In the back seat of cars, I used to shimmy the seatbelt low around my waist, despite once a friend's mother threatening me that doing so would slice off my breasts if there was an accident. Not even 10 years old, I was too small to sit in the passenger seat. Her concern with the flaccid fat on my chest confused me, as if the mother understood about my body, a secret I didn't know. I told no one my new fear, but didn't stop wrangling the seatbelt like a lasso, daring something to happen. Once, in winter, I watched my father driving, tune the radio, searching for a good song or classical, whichever came first. We didn't speak over the electric static, stray notes, and chatter that garbled together into a stillness. All my life, people have branded me carelessly with language. That mother's fear still cuts between my breasts. And that December day, like a dream, my father, wordless, drove us somewhere I can't remember, and no accident happened. Now, the ordinary words that pass between us are gone. He lives only in my mind, and I miss the silence surrounding him, and also the music. One of the other things, again, when I returned to the page after this time, I was obviously a very different person, and my family was completely reoriented in a different way. I was quite young when he died, and one of the things I felt like I lacked in my own writing was trying to not just write elegies, not just write about grief, but to really think about the formal and craft elements of how to embody that grief on the page. And so I am, reading these poems to you, but many of the poems deal with, on the page, this variation of long and short lines, and other kind of ways to mimic what I experienced as the starting and stopping of grief. That was my experience. And so this next poem that I'll read has these crazy long lines and then these really short ones. You probably won't really hear it when I read them. Strange arithmetic. When my brother told me my father died, the world became a radish ripped from the dirt. A photograph creased crudely at the upper corner by greasy, trembling hands. A tinny bell I hoped for, to ring to end the hour, to stop what must be terrible dreaming. It never came. Somehow I slept. I woke. My brain felt burned black as a thick newspaper on fire, a fire started by someone lonely and left over who lifts a match, burns the obituary again and again, until only mothy ash remains. In the yard, I watched rain anoint a lemon tree. Water rolled down the heavy heads of lemons, bent in prayer, the garden abandoned. The washing was ceremony and exquisite. The lemons, penitent, left for toothy animals. The rain kept falling, sliding into 3 blue bowls. Disguised like a laughing person beneath a lion's mask, I wanted to pass through easily. The lost here, then gone. A coin pressed into a slot, a key turned inside a lock. I can't. In a chestnut grove, my father is buried. I leave lemons there. One of the things, again, I found in working on these poems was a real resistance to following some of the traditional forms of the elegy. And so I found myself asking a lot of questions, which was not something I had ever really done in my work before. If you know me, you know I really prefer certainty. So taking myself to a place of questions in the work was difficult. Repair. My father teased the sweater I wore, stretched past my teenage wrists to hide my childhood bruises. We watched as the birches against our house were slit at their crowns to resist their rotting, branches perilous to our safety. The leaves twisting and lost while still half grown. Only after the cutting, we discovered a loose nest and 1 egg, the yolk tossed yellow across the grass, candlelight against a cathedral's windows. A parent's mistakes remain most visible in the child. The birches survived, but where once split, never grew back. And in the absence of branches, moonlight flooded the yard, making it easier to keep secrets. The glare shading all it did not touch. Each night, my father stood in that light, looking up at what I never knew. And what could I have known? Somewhere, even now, branches are falling, and there is no world where I can speak into that dark. One of the other things that I went through in writing these poems, of course, so many of these poems concern my father, as you can hear, and his loss. But what I really found was also an interest in writing what I consider kind of a self-elegy, poems that look at his loss as a way to think about myself, who I was before he died and after. That part of me that is, not who I am now. Downriver. Is there a way back? Language, once as slick as the tongue in my mouth, now a spotted deer, pacing and pawing a silvered stream, fetlocks flecked in dirt, slitting deep grooves into the soil. In the chestnut grove, the dead sleep soundless in the earth. I stand above them, looking into a western light. I stand as if the day doesn't touch me, all the shadows hidden among wildflowers, my hair heavy across my back. In the chestnut grove, my father is buried. Above him, opaque leaves ache and sway. Wind a word music, only they can hear. When the western light is gone, my dress lifts away from me like a kind of worship. A measure of me has been buried here too. The part of me that went missing that night in December. That night, I found there was one less heart beating, and my blood refused, rushed so fast it blurred and blacked my brain until I came to again, having lost an hour, lost a part of me that was never revived elsewhere. This dark sliver of me I listen for, garbled voice high above his grave, a shiver invisible in the leaves. I hear the words of a gone life, a father alive, but it is me who whispers over and over. Again, I was trying to think about, resisting this sense of, the traditional form of the elegy moves from lament, praise to consolation. And I found myself, at times doing that, and at times also just feeling like this loss in my life just fractured my ability to write narrative, fractured my ability to find that element of consolation, and also sometimes made things, really stretched time in a certain way. And so that led to a few kind of wild ones like this one, or what I consider a wild one. On the 14th day without a father. The cloud arrives suddenly in our interior. Dull shroud, wisp that floats mysterious. Spilling a shadow, it invades us. Frosty room, drowned in shade. We obey. I find my mother in deep gaze, eyes locked. My brother afraid, his skin a brocade of bruises. I delay beside them like a sparrow that refuses to eat the airy fluff of dandelions. The cloud pervades. Dark nimbus, we pray for its billows to blow out with the western wind, or for fire to splay it apart. In its shadow, our mislaid secrets cascade down around us. The cloud carries my crocheted sweater, never worn. It holds the keys to all our old houses. It keeps one lock of braided hair. I have no brave desire except to lay across from it, restrained from touching the white veil, waiting for its decay or vanishing, a blade tight in my hand. I study it day and night. I can't locate my father in cloud or shadow. I don't want to stop looking. And I'll just read, this is the last poem from the book, and then I'll read one of the new poems that I've written while I was here. And really, in some ways, they're kind of a bridge. This last poem that I'll read to you thinks about some of the landscape around me as a way to deal with loss, which is something I continued to explore. I'll say more about my other manuscript. I do hope this one has a little bit of consolation. Birthmark. In California, even the worst of us is forgiven. Flooding roads lead to freeway superbloom. Birds make nests out of all our trash. And despite drought, jacarandas spike purple in July, their roots cracking the concrete. Once I tripped under one, tore the skin off my knees, and at last removed the leftover scars of childhood. My father fell once outside the dirtiest apartment I lived in, that overlooked the freeway on a street where no one walked. Yet when he fell, some kind stranger materialized out of the smog and lifted him to his feet. I thought then it was an accident. the stranger a good omen, and raise no alarm over what I would call now his thin legs. But there's no tree to bloom from his grave, his body the opposite of a seed. When I can no longer bear the weight, I declutter my closet, my drawers. Beneath a jacaranda, I leave my abandoned items on the sidewalk, and in only hours, my mistakes are absorbed by the city. Tonight, with the objects gone, I try to think of my regrets with tenderness, handling them the way someone who loves me might touch an old scar.